The morning assembly at the Nexus Military Academy buzzed with the usual mixture of nervous energy and barely contained hostility that came when 23 different species tried to coexist under one administrative dome. Cadet Alexandra Pierce stood in formation with the other first-year students, her plain black uniform stark against the elaborate rank insignia and ceremonial decorations that adorned every other chest in the hall. She could feel the weight of curious stares from her fellow cadets. The Veltar twins, their chitinous plates gleaming with embedded rank crystals, whispered to each other in their clicking language. Behind them, a towering Krygon cadet's 4 eyes tracked her movement with predatory interest, while the feathered Etherean to her left shifted uncomfortably, their iridescent plumage ruffling with obvious disapproval. "Attention, cadets!" The voice belonged to Commandant Velnara, a distinguished Zephyrian whose silver skin seemed to shimmer under the Academy's artificial suns. Her 6 arms moved in perfect synchronization as she gestured toward the assembled crowd. "Today marks the beginning of your tactical assessment period. You will be evaluated not only on your individual capabilities, but on your ability to integrate with multi-species units." Alexandra kept her eyes forward, ignoring the subtle head turns and pointed glances directed her way. She'd grown accustomed to being the anomaly wherever humans were still a novelty. Earth had only joined the Galactic Coalition 15 standard years ago, making humans the newest and, by most accounts, least impressive addition to the interstellar community. The Commandant's gaze swept across the formation, pausing noticeably when it reached Alexandra. "I see we have some cadets who seem to have forgotten proper uniform protocols." The words carried clearly across the silent hall. "Cadet Pierce, step forward." Alexandra moved with practiced precision, her boots echoing against the polished floor. She came to attention 3 paces in front of the Commandant, her expression neutral despite the hundreds of eyes now focused solely on her. "Explain to me, Cadet, why your uniform bears no insignia of rank, specialization, or homeworld designation." Velnara's tone carried the kind of authority that had commanded star fleets for decades. "Are you perhaps unaware of Academy regulations?" "No, ma'am. I am fully aware of the regulations." "Then perhaps your species lacks the cognitive capacity to follow simple dress codes." This comment drew snickers from several of the non-human cadets, particularly a group of hegemony students whose species had been conquering star systems when humans were still discovering fire. Alexandra's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "My species' cognitive capacity is adequate, ma'am." "Then explain yourself." The hall fell into complete silence. Even the usual hum of the Academy's environmental systems seemed to fade as every being present waited for her response. Alexandra could see the anticipation in their faces, the expectation that she would crumble under pressure, stammer some excuse, or reveal herself to be exactly the primitive, disorganized creature they expected all humans to be. "Because the wars weren't official, ma'am." The silence stretched longer. Velnara's silver features shifted into what might have been confusion on a human face. "Elaborate, Cadet." "The conflicts I served in were classified as police actions, peacekeeping missions, and stabilization efforts by the various governing bodies that authorized them. None were officially declared wars, therefore no official decorations or rank insignia were awarded." Alexandra's voice remained steady, professional. Regulation 847C states that unofficial honors and distinctions are not to be displayed on Academy uniforms. A ripple of movement went through the assembled cadets. The Veltar twins stopped their whispering. The Krygon's 4 eyes narrowed to pinpoints. Even some of the instructors seemed to lean forward slightly. Commandant Velnara studied Alexandra with new interest. "How many of these unofficial conflicts did you participate in, Cadet?" 7, ma'am, over the course of 6 years. 6 years? The voice came from behind, one of the hegemony cadets who had been snickering moments before. Humans only live for about 80 standard years. How could you serve for 6 years and still be young enough for academy admission? Alexandra didn't turn around. I enlisted at 14, sir. Human years. This time the silence had a different quality to it. Several species made soft sounds of surprise or disbelief. The Etherian beside her previous position fluffed their feathers in what Alexandra had learned was a sign of agitation or concern among their kind. The tactical simulation chamber resembled a massive holographic arena, its walls capable of projecting any environment the instructors deemed necessary for training. Today's exercise was urban warfare, the kind of close-quarters, high-stress situation that separated competent soldiers from dead ones. Alexandra found herself assigned to Team 7, which the Academy's AI had composed with what she suspected was deliberate malice. Her squad leader was Kethvar, a hegemony warrior whose species had perfected the art of warfare over millennia. Standing nearly 8 feet tall with natural body armor that could deflect most small arms fire, he possessed the kind of casual arrogance that came from belonging to a species that had never lost a war. The other team members included Zilnara, a Veltar engineer whose twin was in a different squad, and Thais, an Etherian communications specialist whose species prided itself on tactical brilliance and strategic thinking. All three had been making pointed comments about having to carry the human through the exercise. "Listen carefully, Primitive," Kethvar had said during the briefing, his 4 mandibles clicking in what passed for amusement among his people. "Stay behind us. Try not to get killed. If you see an enemy, point and make noise. We'll handle the actual fighting." Alexandra had simply nodded, checking her equipment one final time. The simulation weapons felt lighter than what she was used to, and the armor was more sophisticated than anything she'd worn in actual combat. She caught herself unconsciously checking sight lines and calculating angles of fire, habits that had kept her alive when the stakes were real. The scenario was brutal in its simplicity. Their team had to secure a government building in a hostile city, while 3 other teams played the role of insurgents. The holographic environment was remarkably detailed. She could smell the acrid smoke from burning vehicles, hear the distant sound of weapons fire, even feel the heat radiating from damaged buildings. "Move out," Kethvar commanded, gesturing with one of his primary arms toward the target structure 6 blocks away. "Standard formation. The human stays in the center where she can't cause trouble." They moved through the simulated streets with the kind of textbook precision that impressed Academy instructors and got real soldiers killed. Zilnara took point with her scanning equipment, followed by Kethvar, then Alexandra, with Thais bringing up the rear while monitoring communications. It was exactly the kind of formation Alexandra would have expected from people who had learned warfare from manuals instead of necessity. The first ambush came from a 3rd-story window overlooking their route. Simulation rounds sparked off the pavement around them as the team scrambled for cover behind a burned-out vehicle. Kethvar immediately began barking orders, directing Zilnara to establish a firing position, while Thais called for artillery support that wouldn't arrive for another 10 minutes. Alexandra was already moving. She rolled away from the cover of the vehicle, drawing return fire as she sprinted toward the building. Behind her, she could hear Kethvar shouting something about unauthorized movement and staying in formation. The simulation rounds cracked past her head, close enough that she could feel the heat, but she'd spent years learning to read the rhythm of enemy fire. The building's entrance had been blocked by debris, but there was a gap in the rubble large enough for someone her size to squeeze through. She could hear footsteps above, at least 2 hostiles, maybe 3, repositioning to maintain their firing angle on her trapped teammates. The stairwell was dark, filled with the kind of shadows that could hide a dozen enemies. Alexandra moved up the steps with practiced silence, her weapon ready but not raised. Movement attracted attention faster than anything else. She could hear voices from the 3rd floor, speaking in the kind of casual tones that meant they felt secure in their position. They were wrong. The engagement lasted exactly 43 seconds, from the moment Alexandra reached the third floor to when the last hostile simulator went offline. Her teammates, still pinned behind their vehicle, watched through their tactical displays as 3 red dots on their screens simply disappeared. "Contact neutralized." Alexandra's voice came through their comm system, calm and professional. "Building secure. You can advance." When they reached the third floor, they found her standing amid 3 deactivated training androids, not even breathing heavily. The simulated insurgents had been positioned to cover the street below, their attention focused entirely on maintaining their ambush. None of them had expected a frontal assault through a building they'd assumed was impassable. Kethvar stared at the scene, his mandibles working silently. "How did you—" "The gap in the debris was large enough," Alexandra said simply. "They weren't watching their 6. You could have been killed," Thys pointed out, their feathers ruffled with agitation. "That was completely against tactical doctrine. Tactical doctrine assumes you have time to follow it." Alexandra was already moving toward the windows, checking sight lines to their next objective. "We have 4 more blocks to cover and at least 2 teams between us and the target. How long do you want to spend explaining why doctrine matters to simulated corpses?" Zilnara's chitinous plates clicked together, a sound that indicated deep thought among her people. "The human is correct about our tactical situation. However, her methods are—" She paused, searching for words in standard. "Irregular." "Effective," Alexandra corrected. "The distinction matters when people are shooting at you." The rest of the exercise proceeded differently. Instead of treating Alexandra as dead weight to be protected, her teammates began following her lead. When she indicated a potential sniper position, they trusted her judgment. When she suggested an alternative route that looked more dangerous but offered better concealment, they took it. By the time they reached the government building, they had eliminated 2 full teams of hostiles while taking 0 casualties. Their final assault on the objective took 7 minutes, a new academy record. In the debriefing chamber afterward, Instructor Velkaran, a veteran Zephyrian tactician, reviewed their performance with obvious bewilderment. "Cadet Pierce," he began, his 6 arms moving in complex patterns that indicated confusion. "Your tactical decisions showed complete disregard for established doctrine." "Yes, sir." "They also showed remarkable effectiveness." He paused, consulting his display. "Where exactly did you learn these techniques?" "Kandahar, sir. Fallujah, Mosul, Helmand Province." Alexandra listed the names without emotion, though she noticed how several of her teammates exchanged glances. "Places where doctrine gets you killed and improvisation keeps you breathing." Kethvar leaned forward in his chair. "Those are human settlements?" "They were cities in conflict zones, sir. Places where the fighting was close, personal, and continuous." Alexandra's tone remained neutral, professional. "Urban warfare against an enemy that doesn't follow your rules and doesn't wear uniforms." "And you were there for 6 years?" This question came from Thys, whose feathers had settled into what Alexandra had learned was a pattern indicating respectful attention. "Different places, same type of fighting. The enemy changes, the terrain changes, but the principles remain constant." Alexandra looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes, or eye clusters, in turn. "Stay alive, complete the mission, bring your people home." Instructor Velkaran made several notes on his display. "Cadet Pierce, you mentioned these were not official wars. Can you explain what that means in practical terms?" Alexandra was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "It means the politicians who sent us there could claim they weren't sending soldiers into combat. It means the rules of engagement changed depending on who was watching. It means when you came home, there were no parades, no medals, no acknowledgement that you'd been in a war at all. The Academy's central mess hall was a marvel of engineering, designed to accommodate the dietary needs and social customs of dozens of different species. Atmospheric zones maintained different gas mixtures, Gravity sections varied to accommodate beings from high and low-mass worlds, and the food preparation systems could synthesize everything from hydrogen-based nutrients to complex organic proteins. Alexandra sat alone at a human standard table, working through a meal that approximated Earth cuisine while reviewing tactical manuals on her datapad. Around her, clusters of cadets from various species maintained their own social groupings, the natural tribalism that seemed to transcend galactic politics. She'd grown accustomed to eating alone. Most non-human species found human dietary habits either disgusting or incomprehensible, while the few other human cadets at the academy tended to avoid her after word of her background had spread through the informal communication networks that existed in any military institution. "Mind if we join you?" The voice belonged to Cadet, though his tone was different from their previous interactions, less condescending, more curious. Alexandra looked up to find her entire simulation team standing nearby with their meal containers. "Free Academy," she said, gesturing to the empty chairs around her table. They settled in with the kind of careful attention to personal space that indicated beings still learning to interact across species lines. Zilnara's clicking had softened to barely audible levels, a sign of relaxation among her people. Thais perched on a chair designed for their anatomy, their feathers displaying patterns that Alexandra had learned indicated contemplative mood. "I have been researching human military history," Zilnara announced without preamble. "Your species has a fascinating approach to warfare." "Meaning?" "Meaning you fight like you're trying to die," Cadet said bluntly. "But you're very good at making sure the other side dies first." Alexandra paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. "Is that a question or an observation?" "Both." Thais leaned forward slightly. "In the simulation today, you exposed yourself to enemy fire at least 6 times. By all tactical calculations, you should have been eliminated in the first exchange." "But I wasn't." "No," Zilnara agreed, her mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "You moved in ways that our opponents did not expect. They calculated your behavior based on standard tactical doctrine and found themselves unable to predict your actions." Alexandra resumed eating, considering how to explain concepts that seemed self-evident to her. When you're fighting people who know the same doctrine you do, following that doctrine becomes predictable. Predictable gets you killed. "So you deliberately chose unpredictable tactics?" Cathvar's question carried genuine curiosity rather than the dismissive tone she'd grown used to. "I chose effective tactics. The fact that they were unpredictable was a bonus." Alexandra looked around the table, noting the focused attention of her teammates. "In real combat, the enemy gets a vote. They're trying to kill you just as hard as you're trying to kill them. Academic tactical theory assumes you're fighting opponents who will react rationally to your movements. Reality is messier." Thais made a soft chirping sound that indicated agreement among their species. "This explains why human forces have been surprisingly effective in coalition conflicts despite your technological limitations." "What technological limitations?" The question seemed to puzzle all 3 of her companions. Zilnara answered first. "Human technology is approximately 400 years behind current galactic standards. Your ships are slower, your weapons less sophisticated, your defensive systems primitive by contemporary measures." Alexandra nodded slowly. "And yet human military units have achieved success rates comparable to much more advanced species," Cadet admitted reluctantly. "It has been a subject of considerable debate among military analysts." "Maybe," Alexandra suggested, "the technology isn't as important as how you use it." She stood to return her meal container, but paused when Thais spoke again. "The wars you mentioned, Kandahar, Fallujah, I researched those names. They appear in several classified coalition intelligence reports as examples of asymmetric conflict resolution." Alexandra's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted almost imperceptibly. "Classified reports? My species has access to certain intelligence databases due to our role in coalition communications networks, Theiss explained. The reports describe human military units achieving victory against numerically superior and better equipped opponents through what they term innovative tactical adaptation. The reports also mention casualty rates, Zilnara added quietly. The silence stretched for several seconds before Alexandra sat back down. When she spoke, her voice carried a different quality, not the professional neutrality she usually maintained, but something rawer, more personal. Casualty rates, she repeated. Is that what they called them in the reports? Theiss nodded, their feathers shifting to patterns Alexandra hadn't seen before. 37% average attrition across human units engaged in these conflicts, the highest sustained combat losses of any coalition member species. 37%. Alexandra stared at her hands. That's not a statistic when you're living it. That's friends who don't come home. That's empty bunks and gear that gets shipped back to families who were told their children died for something important. Kethvar leaned back in his chair, his massive frame suddenly seeming less imposing. You lost people. I lost everyone. The words came out flat, matter of fact. My first unit was a reconnaissance team, 12 soldiers. By the end of our deployment, I was the only one left. My second unit was infantry, 32 people when we deployed, 11 when we rotated home. My third unit ... She trailed off, shaking her head. Why did you keep enlisting? Zilnara's question was barely above a whisper. Because someone had to do the job. Alexandra looked up, meeting each of their gazes in turn. Because the politicians could call them police actions and peacekeeping missions all they wanted, but people were still dying. Real people, with families and friends and plans for the future. But you were a child, Theiss protested. 14 standard years. That's barely past hatching for most species. Alexandra's smile held no warmth. Human children grow up fast when they have to. And I had to. She stood again, and this time none of them tried to stop her. But as she reached the edge of their table's gravity field, Kethvar's voice followed her. The simulation today, when you assaulted that building, you moved like you'd done it before. Alexandra paused without turning around. I had. How many times? Enough to know that hesitation kills more soldiers than enemy fire. She walked away, leaving her teammates sitting in contemplative silence. Around them, the mess hall continued its usual routine. Hundreds of beings from across the galaxy sharing meals and conversation, preparing for careers as coalition officers, learning the skills they would need to maintain peace among the stars. None of them had learned those skills by watching their friends die. Later that evening, Alexandra found herself in the Academy's observation deck, staring out at the star field beyond. The view was spectacular, thousands of points of light representing civilizations that had achieved interstellar travel, built cities on alien worlds, created technologies that seemed like magic to her species. Mind if I join you? Kethvar's voice was careful, respectful in a way it hadn't been before. Free galaxy, Alexandra replied, echoing her earlier response but with less edge. He settled beside her at the viewing wall, his bulk requiring a specially reinforced section of the deck. For several minutes they stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars. I've been thinking about what you said, he finally spoke, about the wars not being official. And it occurs to me that declaring something unofficial doesn't make it less real for the people living through it. Kethvar's voice carried a thoughtful quality that seemed incongruous, coming from someone his size. My species has always fought official wars, declared conflicts with clear objectives and defined rules of engagement. The idea of fighting without recognition, without acknowledgement. He trailed off. It's not about recognition, Alexandra said quietly. It's about necessity. Sometimes the right thing to do isn't the official thing to do. Sometimes you have to act without permission, without support, without the promise that anyone will remember what you sacrificed. Is that why you're here, at the academy? Alexandra considered the question for a long moment. I'm here because someone needs to remember how to fight wars that don't exist, because someday the coalition is going to face an enemy that doesn't care about our rules, our doctrine, our official declarations, and when that day comes, they're going to need people who understand that survival matters more than protocol. 3 weeks later, the Academy's emergency sirens shattered the pre-dawn quiet. Alexandra rolled out of her bunk fully awake, a skill learned in places where the difference between sleep and alertness could be measured in heartbeats. Around her, other cadets struggled to orient themselves as the automated voice system announced a code black scenario. This is not a drill. All cadets report to emergency stations immediately. This is not a drill. The corridors filled with confused voices as hundreds of beings tried to understand what was happening. Emergency lighting cast everything in harsh red shadows, while the station's defensive systems came online with mechanical precision. Alexandra moved against the flow of cadets heading for the main assembly areas, making her way instead toward the command deck. Code Black meant external threat, something the Academy's formidable defensive systems couldn't handle alone. She found chaos waiting for her. The main tactical display showed a swarm of ships approaching the Academy at combat speed, vessels that didn't match any known coalition design. Commandant Velnara stood at the center of the command deck, her 6 arms moving rapidly across multiple control surfaces while she coordinated with fleet elements throughout the system. Unknown vessels refused to respond to communication attempts, one of the communications officers reported. Their approach vector suggests hostile intent. Defensive systems are online, but we have over 3,000 cadets aboard this station, another officer added. Evacuation protocols would require at least 4 hours to complete. Alexandra slipped closer to the tactical display, studying the enemy formation. 27 ships in 3 groups, moving with the kind of coordination that suggested experienced crews. Their approach pattern was designed to overwhelm the Academy's defensive grid while minimizing their own exposure to return fire. She'd seen similar tactics before. "Commandant," she called out, drawing surprised stares from the senior staff. "I need to see the enemy ship configurations." Velnara's silver features twisted into an expression of annoyance. "Cadet Pierce, you are not authorized to be on this deck during emergency operations." "Ma'am, I recognize their formation pattern." The statement hung in the air for a moment before Velnara gestured toward one of the tactical officers. The display zoomed in on the approaching ships, revealing sleek, predatory designs that looked more grown than built. Alexandra studied them for 30 seconds before nodding grimly. Shadane raiders, probably outcasts from their core territories looking for easy targets. How can you possibly identify alien ship designs? The question came from Commander Thexadar, the Academy's tactical instructor. "Because I've fought them before." Alexandra moved to one of the auxiliary control stations, her fingers flying over the interface. 3 years ago, off Proxima Station, they used the same approach pattern, multiple small groups to divide defensive fire while their main assault ships closed distance. She highlighted several elements of the enemy formation on the display. These ships here are decoys, minimal crew, loaded with sensor reflectors to make them look like primary threats. The real danger is this group, coming in from our sensor shadow. They'll wait until we commit our defensive fire to the decoys, then hit us where we're weakest. Velnara moved closer to the display, studying Alexandra's analysis. "You're suggesting these raiders are using sophisticated tactical deception?" "I'm telling you they are." Alexandra's voice carried absolute certainty. "The Shadane don't fight fair, they don't follow conventional tactics, and they don't leave survivors to report their methods." The command deck fell silent, except for the steady ping of sensors tracking the approaching threat. Alexandra could feel the weight of stares from the senior staff, beings with decades of experience trying to process tactical advice from a cadet who wasn't supposed to be there. "What do you recommend, Cadet?" Velnara's question carried no condescension, only professional interest. "Ignore the decoys. Focus all defensive fire on the real assault group while they're still at maximum range. Don't let them close distance. Shadane ships are designed for close combat, where their superior acceleration gives them the advantage." "And if you're wrong?" Alexandra met the commandant's gaze steadily. "Then you court-martial me for insubordination and conduct an investigation into how a cadet gained access to classified tactical information. And if you're right, then 3,000 cadets go home to their families instead of becoming casualty statistics in a raid that never officially happened." Velnara studied the tactical display for another few seconds, then began issuing orders. "All defensive batteries, new targeting priorities. Focus fire on enemy formation Gamma, ignore formations Alpha and Beta. Fighter squadrons, intercept Vector 37 Mark II." The next 17 minutes provided a masterclass in the difference between theoretical tactics and practical experience. The Academy's defensive systems, guided by Alexandra's tactical analysis, systematically destroyed the Shadane assault ships, while their decoy formations uselessly absorbed sensor attention. When the last raider ship exploded in a brilliant flash of expanding plasma, the command deck erupted in cheers from a dozen different species. Velnara turned to face Alexandra, her expression unreadable. "Cadet Pierce, report to my office in 1 hour." Alexandra nodded crisply. "Yes, ma'am." As she turned to leave, she found Kethvar, Zilnara, and Thais waiting near the command deck entrance. Her teammates' expressions held a mixture of respect and something that might have been awe. "The wars that weren't official," Kethvar said quietly. "How many times did you fight those raiders?" "Officially?" Alexandra paused at the threshold. "Never. The Shadane don't exist in Coalition space, and raiders don't attack human settlements." She walked away, leaving them to contemplate the implications. Behind her, the command staff began the process of filing reports about an engagement that would probably be classified as a minor piracy incident and forgotten by everyone except the 3,000 cadets who lived because someone had learned to fight wars that didn't exist. In Commandant Velnara's office an hour later, Alexandra stood at attention while the senior officer reviewed her service record on a secured terminal. The silence stretched for several minutes before Velnara spoke. "Your file makes for fascinating reading, Cadet. 6 years of continuous combat experience in conflicts that, according to official records, never involved human military forces." "Yes, ma'am." "The interesting thing about unofficial wars," Velnara continued, "is that they require unofficial soldiers, people who can fight without recognition, serve without acknowledgement, and sacrifice without the promise of remembrance." Alexandra remained silent. "The Coalition is going to need more officers like you, Cadet Pierce, officers who understand that sometimes the most important battles are the ones that never make it into the history books." Velnara stood, moving to the window that looked out over the Academy's main training complex. Thousands of cadets from dozens of species were going about their daily routines, preparing for careers as Coalition officers in a galaxy that had known relative peace for over a century. "I'm accelerating your training schedule," she announced. "You'll be graduating with advanced tactical certification and assignment to the Coalition's Special Operations Division." "Ma'am, someone needs to teach the next generation of officers how to fight wars that don't exist, Cadet. Someone who's already proven they can win them." Alexandra's expression didn't change, but something in her posture straightened almost imperceptibly. "Understood, ma'am." Dismissed. As Alexandra left the office, she passed a group of first-year cadets heading to their morning tactical seminar. Among them, she recognized several of the aliens who had been snickering about human cognitive capacity just a few weeks earlier. Now they watched her with the kind of careful attention usually reserved for dangerous predators. One of them, a young hegemony cadet, worked up the courage to speak as she passed. "Excuse me, Cadet Pierce?" She paused, turning to face him. "Is it true that you've been in real combat?" Alexandra considered the question, thinking about friends who had died in places that didn't exist, for causes that were never acknowledged, in wars that were never officially fought. "Define real," she said finally, and continued down the corridor. Behind her, the young cadet stood staring after her retreating form, beginning to understand that the galaxy was a more complex and dangerous place than his textbooks had suggested. And somewhere in the vast network of stars and civilizations that made up Coalition space, other conflicts simmered, conflicts that would require soldiers who understood the difference between what was official and what was necessary. The wars that didn't exist would always need people willing to fight them.